Hamlet's Mill is an extremely dense and long essay co-written by Giorgio de Santillana, professor of history of science at MIT, and Herta von Deschend, a scientist at Johann Wolfgang Goethe University. It was heavily criticized when it was released in 1969, and as a result was pretty much forgotten about. But lately the works of people like Randall Carlson, for example, are starting to give this book a deserving second chance. Hamlet's Mill is the most complete academic work on comparative history and mythology ever written, even if it was only meant to be an essay. The footage shown is of a textile mill from the early 1800s that I actually work at and is now being renovated. I'll be uploading videos on subjects similar to this at least once a week, so feel free to like and subscribe. Hope you enjoy. It starts off with a quote from the Edda. The unbreakable fetters, which bound down the great wolf Fenrir, had been cunningly forged by Loki from these: the footfall of a cat, the roots of a rock, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. This is meant to be only an essay. It is a first reconnaissance of a realm well nigh explored and uncharted. From whichever way one enters it, one is caught in the same bewildering, circular complexity as in a labyrinth. For it has no deductive order in the abstract sense, but instead resembles an organism tightly closed in itself, or even better, a monumental art of the fugue. The figure of Hamlet as a favorable starting point came by chance. Many other avenues offered themselves, rich in strange symbols and beckoning with great images, but the choice went to Hamlet because he led the mind on a truly inductive quest through a familiar landscape, and one which has the merit of its literary setting. Here is a character deeply present to our awareness, in whom ambiguities and uncertainties, tormented self-questioning and dispassionate insight give a presentiment of the modern mind. His personal drama was that he had to be a hero, but still try to avoid the role destiny assigned to him. His lucid intellect remained above the conflict of motives. In other words, he was and is a truly contemporary consciousness. And yet this character, whom the poet made one of us, the first unhappy intellectual, concealed a past as a legendary being, his features predetermined, pre-shaped by long-standing myth. There was a numinous aura around him, and many clues led up to him, but it was a surprise to find behind the mask of an ancient and all-embracing cosmic power, the original master of the dreamed-of first age of the world. Yet, in all his guises, he remained strangely himself. The original, Amlodi, I think I pronounced that right, as his name was an Icelandic legend, shows the same characteristics of melancholy and high intellect. He too is a son dedicated to avenge his father, a speaker of cryptic but inescapable truths, an elusive carrier of fate who must yield once his mission is accomplished, and sink once more into concealment in the depths of time to which he belongs, Lord of the Golden Age, the once and future king. This essay will follow the figure farther and farther afield, from the Northland to Rome, from there to Finland, Iran, India. He will appear again unmistakably in Polynesian legend. Many other dominations and powers will materialize to frame him within a proper order. Amlodi was identified in the crude and vivid imagery of the Norse by the ownership of a fabled mill, which in his own time ground out peace and plenty. Later, in decaying times, it ground out salt. And now finally, having landed at the bottom of the sea, it is grinding rock and sand, creating a vast whirlpool, the maelstrom, i.e. the grinding stream from the verb mala, to grind, which is supposed to be a way to the land of the dead. This imagery stands, as the evidence develops, for an astronomical process, the secular shifting of the suns through the signs of the zodiac, which determines world ages, each numbering thousands of years. Each age brings a world era, a twilight of the gods. Great structures collapse. Pillars topple, which supported the great fabric. Floods and cataclysms herald the shaping of a new world. The image of the mill and its owner yielded elsewhere to more sophisticated ones, more adherent to celestial events. In Plato's powerful mind, the figure stood out as the craftsman god, the demiurge, who shaped the heavens. But even Plato did not escape the idea he had inherited of catastrophes and the periodic rebuilding of the world. Tradition will show that measures of a new world had to be procured from the depths of the celestial ocean and tuned with the measures from above dictated by the seven sages, as they are often cryptically mentioned in India and elsewhere. They turn out to be the 7 stars of Ursa, which are normative in all cosmological alignments on the starry sphere. These dominant stars of the far north are peculiar but systematically linked with those which are considered the operative powers of the cosmos, that is, the planets as they move in different placements and configurations along the zodiac. The ancient Pythagoreans, in their conventional language, called the 2 bears the hands of Re, the lady of the turning heaven, and called the planets the hounds of Persephone, queen of the underworld. Far away to the south, the mysterious ship Argo, with its pilot star, held the depths of past, and the galaxy was the bridge out of time. These notions appear to have been common doctrine in the age before history, all over the belt of high civilizations around the globe. They also seem to have been born of the great intellectual and technological revolution of the late Neolithic period. The intensity and richness, the coincidence of details in this cumulative thought, have led to the conclusion that it all had its origin in the Near East. It is evident that this indicates a diffusion of ideas to an extent hardly countenanced by current anthropology. But this science, although it has dug up marvelous wealth of details, has been led by its modern evolutionary and psychological bent to forget about the main source of myth, which was astronomy, the royal science. This obliviousness is itself a recent turn of events, barely a century old. Today, expert philologists tell us that Saturn and Jupiter are names of vague deities, subterranean or atmospheric, superimposed on the planet at a quote-unquote late period. They neatly sort out folks' origins and quote late derivatives, all unaware that planetary periods, sidereal and synodic, were known and rehearsed in numerous ways by celebrations already traditional in archaic times. If a scholarship has ever known those periods even from elementary science, he is not in the best position to recognize them when they come up in his material. Ancient historians would have been aghast had they been told that obvious things were to become unnoticeable. Aristotle was proud to state it as known that the gods were originally stars, even if popular fantasy had later obscured the truth. Little as he believed in progress, he felt this much had been secured for the future. He could not guess that W.D. Ross, his modern editor, would condescendingly annotate, "This is historically untrue." Yet we know that Saturday and Sabbath had to do with Saturn, just as Wednesday and Mercredi had to do with Mercury. Such names are as old as time, as old certainly as the planetary heptagram of the Herarians. They go back far before the Professor Ross Greek philology. The inquiries of great and meticulous scholars such as Ideler, Lepicius, Quolson, Bull, and go farther back of Athanasius Kircher and Petavius, had they only been read carefully and noted, would have taught several relevant lessons to the historians of culture. But interest shifted to the other goals, as can be seen from the current anthropology, which has built up its own idea of the quote-unquote primitive and what came after. One still reads in that most unscientific of records, the Bible, that God disposed all things by number, weight, and measure. Ancient Chinese texts said that, quote, "the calendar and the pitch pipes have such a close fit that you could not slip a hair between them," unquote. People read it and think nothing of it. Yet such hints might reveal a world of vast and firmly established complexity, infinitely different from ours. But the experts are now benighted by the current folk fantasy, which is the belief that they are all beyond this, critics without nonsense and extremely wise. We think we have now broken part of the code. The thought behind these constructions of the high and far off times is also lofty, even if its forms are strange. The theory about, quote, how the world began, unquote, seems to involve the breaking asunder of harmony, a kind of cosmological, quote, original sun, unquote, whereby the circle of the ecliptic with the zodiac was tilted up at an angle with respect to the equator, and the cycles of change came into being. This is not to suggest that the archaic cosmology will show any great physical discoveries, although it inquired prodigious feats of concentration and computing. What it did was to mark out the unity of the universe and man's mind, reaching out to the farthest limits. Truly, man is doing the same today. Einstein said, quote, "What is inconceivable about the universe is that it should be at all conceivable," unquote. Man is not giving up. When he discovers remote galaxies by the millions, and then those quasi-stellar radio sources, billions of light years away, which confound his speculation. He is happy that he can reach out to those depths, but he pays a terrible price for his achievement. The science of astrophysics reaches out on a grander and grander scale without losing its footing. Man as man cannot do this. In the depths of space, he loses himself and all notions of his significance. He is unable to fit himself into the concepts of today's astrophysics, short of schizophrenia. Modern man is facing the non-conceivable. Archaic man, however, kept a firm grip on the conceivable by framing within his cosmos an order of time and eschatology that made sense to him and reserved a fate for his soul. Yet it was a prodigiously vast theory with no concessions to merely human sentiments. It too dilated the mind beyond the bearable, although without destroying man's role in the cosmos. It was a ruthless metaphysics. Not a forgiving universe, not a world of mercy, that surely not. Inexorable as the stars in their course, miseratonius par sisame, the Romans used to say. Yet it was the world somehow not unmindful of man, one in which there was an accepted place for everything, rightfully and not only statistically, where no sparrow could fall unnoted, and where even what was rejected through its own error would not go down to eternal perdition. For the order of the number and time was a total order preserving all, of which all were members, gods and men and animals, trees and crystals, and even absurd errant stars, all subject to law and measure. This is what Plato knew, who could still speak the language of archaic myth. He made myth consonant with his thought, as he built the first modern philosophy. We have trusted his clues as landmarks, even on occasion when he professes to speak, quote, not quite seriously, unquote. He gave us a first rule of thumb. He knew what he was talking about. Behind Plato there stands the imposing body of doctrine attributed to Pythagoras, some of its formulations uncouth, but rich with the prodigious content of early mathematics, pregnant with the science and metaphysics that were to flower in Plato's time. From it came such words as theorem, theory, and philosophy. This, in its turn, rests on what might be called Proto-Pythagorean phase, spread all over the East, but with a focus in Susa. And then there was something else, the stark numerical computing of Babylon. From it all came that strange principle, quote, things are numbers, unquote. One having grasped a thread going back in time with their own historical developments lies in the congruence with tradition preserved intact, even if half understood. Once having grasped a thread going back in time, then the test of later doctrines, with their own historical developments, lies in their congruence with tradition preserved intact, even if half understood. For there are seeds which propagate themselves along the jet stream of time. And universality is in itself a test when coupled with a firm design. When something found, say, in China turns up also in Babylonian astrological texts, then it must be assumed to be relevant, for it reveals a complex of uncommon images which nobody could claim had risen independently by spontaneous generation. Take the origin of music. Orpheus and his harrowing death may be a poetic creation born in more than one instance in diverse places. But when characters who do not play the lyre but blow pipes get themselves flayed alive for various absurd reasons, and their identical end is rehearsed on several continents, and when the Pied Piper turns up both in the medieval German myth of Hamlet and in Mexico long before Columbus, and is linked in both places with certain attributes like the color red, it can hardly be a coincidence. Generally, there is little that finds its way into music by chance. Again, when one finds numbers like 108 or 9 times 13 reappearing under several multiples in the Vedas, in the temples of Angkor, in Babylonia, in Heraclitus' dark utterances, and also in the Norse Valhalla, it is not an accident.